in federal government, and the contractual requirements that the state approving agency has to abide by in order to meet the state's requirements. So there was a total of 1,167 actions for the quarter under the state approving agency for veterans education benefits. Okay, I apologize again for the fast review, but I do stop for questions or comments.
Any questions or comments from the commission? Dr. Dow, could you please put the screen back so we can see our fellow commissioners? Thank you.
I have.
Yes, Commissioner Agu.
Sure. Good morning.
Good
and
morning.
thank you for the presentation. On going back to the private career folks, just maybe a couple of just asks. One, I should get this myself, but if we could get a copy of the questionnaire,
Absolutely.
that would be helpful. And this is a process question that I'm asking. So when folks are either approved or approved for renewal, I'm trying to figure out a way to ask this nicely. Is it purely have they gone? Is it a compliance exercise, or are we looking at as well kind of outcomes, meaning graduation rates, potentially, because these are very workforce-focused programs, or folks getting employed? How does that factor into the analysis of either their approval or their renewal?
Well, procedurally for the renewal, looking at the outcomes is a factor. We really are focusing more and more on the compliance. Due to the pandemic and some of our institutions stumbling a little bit over the last few years, we've looked at the outcomes. We've seen a few decreases, but we're also trying to be sensitive to the restructuring and rebuilding of some of those institutions. So at this time, and also the team now is fully staffed.
Sure.
So we're very grateful for that. So the team now, actually today, is out on a compliance visit for our renewal. So their focus is on the compliance, essentially doing a mini version of the initial application to check on factors that the outcomes, the enrollment, documentation of the students. So they are really focusing on that. And they're working with those institutions when they see that institutions are struggling. Because in many cases, these individuals are not educators by trade. They're great at their craft. So the analysts are working with them through some of have a school closure. But you can see on some of the reports that inevitably it will be a school closure, and we will look to protect the students at that point.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Other questions? All right.
Okay, so let me just offer a few comments. First of all, private career schools, some of them are doing outstanding work. Sure. A strong partnership in automotive industries like Tesla and others, and they are supported by those industries as well. Automotive, HVAC, welding, they are really contributing to the workforce development. I had an opportunity to visit at least few, and I will continue to visit more. The other thing, the NC-SARA, where we have these agreements where we allow Maryland residents to take online classes from institutions in other states. Same way, students from other states take classes from Maryland institutions. I'm always interested in knowing how many students from other states are taking classes at Maryland institutions, and certainly, some of our residents are taking classes at institutions outside Maryland. So can you show us the number and which one is greater?
Okay. So to answer your question, there were almost 38,000 out-of-state residents enrolled in online programs at Maryland institutions. And yes, it does go both ways, but let's see, we had 6,300.
1,345 or so.
We are, I'm so sorry. Is it?
It's okay. That's okay. Go ahead.
So we are bringing in more students to distance ed than exporting students to distance ed.
Not just more, significantly more, and I wanted commissioners and audience to make a note of it. So this agreement is good, and our institutions are competitive, and they're doing very, very good work.
Okay.
Can I ask one follow-up? Which makes those are great numbers to hear. How much of that is driven by UMGC? I imagine the vast majority, but I just wanted to ask and make sure.
Yes, they are a big contributor. We don't have the numbers actually by institution. That was something we'd have to work with our research folks on.
Right, and we can pull that information.
That would be great.
but
No,
yes.
I imagine, and it just shows how important UMGC is as an institution for us. Thank you.
Certainly, I also suspect that majority of these students are at UMGC, but you'll be surprised. Community colleges in Maryland are also bringing in students from other states, so it'll be nice to see this spread. I also want to thank Director Gordon McEwen. To her and her team, tremendous amount of work is done in that area, and we want to make sure that regulatory work and statutory work is being done right, so Maryland students are getting quality education through these institutions. Again, thank you to you and your team for this work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to echo Dr. Rai's thanks, Ms. McCown. Excellent presentation, wonderful report. I think a lot of us on this commission read it in advance, and so the fact that you got so few questions shows how thorough the work was of you and your team. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the feedback, and I will definitely share that with the team. As I mentioned, most of them are staffing up, and we have a lot of new people that are stepping up and hitting the ground running. So I'm very thankful for my team because they are really doing a lot of good work. So thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
All right. Next on the agenda, we have an update on student transfer in Maryland. Dr. Dow.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to provide just some quick updates and then turn the time back over to Secretary Rye to provide some additional updates. We will soon release a request to the institutions to provide updated implementation plans. We'll probably give the institutions about 4 weeks to submit those plans, and so I plan to report back to you all on those implementation plans. In particular, we will be asking a question about challenges that institutions are facing in the implementation so that we can figure out how to best assist them, if further regulatory changes need to be made, if we need to do further guidance, and what those next steps look like. So implementation plans are forthcoming, and I'll report back either at the February or March, depending on timing, commission meeting of what that looks like on our campuses. The other item that we continue to work on internally is our data collection. We continue to spin our wheels a little bit on what that looks like, and we will be convening a work group, a small work group of institutional researchers, transfer coordinators, registrars, and possibly even students themselves to figure out how we make this collection meaningful, not just in terms of the simple requirement that institutions tell us when they've denied a course or credit, but what does that mean for policy? We want this to be an informative collection so that we can change things that are impacting our students. So those are the two big initiatives that we continue to undertake, and more to come as we get those implementation plans. We expect to make that request of institutions this week. With that, I will turn it over to Secretary Rye to provide some additional updates on transfer initiatives.
So thank you, Dr. Dow. Transfer is an important work. It's complicated work, but for our goals of completion, degree completion, completion with less debt or no debt, I think transfer is the key. So we are paying very, very serious attention to it. I'm excited to share that we are in discussions with Aspen Institute regarding a collection that will elevate transfer in the state of Maryland. The Aspen Institute approached me as soon as I came into this role as acting secretary. If we succeed, I think we are almost there. The collaboration will accomplish 3 goals. First, elevate transfer by creating a strategic council. Second, engage dyads or triads of institutions by developing plans and a seamless environment for students. Third, help our agency develop goals regarding transfer, both quantitative and qualitative. We want to make sure that the students who take classes at community colleges those courses transfer, not only transfer, they should be counted as in their major, applied to their major, and then degree credit loss should be minimized. On average, students lose around 10 credits nationally after transfer. We want to make sure that number should be almost zero in the state of Maryland. And then a student's GPA after transfer. A student should be academically prepared to make sure that they succeed after transfer. I am very interested in understanding the loss of transfer, as I said, and also transfer students who are leaving state, students who are going out of state. We want to keep all students in Maryland, especially transfer students. Increasing STEM transfer pathways and providing support to students that start their higher education and career at a community college. Great investment in students. Affordability is important. And we want to make sure that things like dual admission for specific academic programs and tuition stability between community colleges and four-year institutions is important. Once a student transfers from community college to four-year institution, the tuition jumps up. We want to make sure how four-year education is also as affordable as a community college to our residents. I'm very excited about this partnership. As soon as the final MOU is signed, I'll happily inform you. Thank you.
Secretary Rye, thank you for that information, and I'm very well aware of the Aspen Institute. Can you just share a little bit more about the Aspen Institute and what their role would be? Are they providing resources? Are they partnering with you to get the data, or just a little, if you can?
Yeah, so Aspen Institute will be bringing national best practices.
Okay.
They will be helping us develop the success matrix for transfer institutions, and most importantly, Commissioner Wormack, they'll be providing financial resources to do this work.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you,
One-
Secretary Rye.
One question or comment. First of all, this is great. I've gotten to work with Aspen previously, and I'm glad that we're bringing them here to Maryland. One group of stakeholders that I might recommend including in this conversation, and it might seem odd, is actually some of the large SIS technology providers, the Ellucians of the world, because in the end, if we think about the data piece of this, not knowing what happens, right now we depend on people to send notes and emails that this student transferred and this one hasn't, and we know what the amount of students we're talking about. To the extent that this can be an automated process, and in the end, my gut is, if you were to look at all the base technology infrastructure of most of our schools, it's like 3 or 4 vendors. It's actually not that many because it's a fairly consolidated market. There may be some opportunities to make that a lot easier and include some of those folks. And a lot of them are actually based in the national capital region. I think Lucian's in Northern Virginia, so on and so forth. So that might be you might already be talking to them, and if you are, you're usually ahead of me. But that might be a group of stakeholders to include in this process to help begin to make that part easier, so it's less work on the people and more on the machines.
I completely agree with you, Commissioner. Most of these companies are in National Capital Region. We would like them to be in Maryland. So,
Well, we won't take it out of them for being in Virginia. We won't.
but you're true. But when you look at the technology, I think there's so much opportunity space for the technology to improve. Our issues that we face in transfer, I see the technology not being there at this point. It's an opportunity to develop the technology. I hope more startups and others who have grassroots understanding of these issues try to create technology that solves these problems. Not taking an existing technology and try to fit into this situation that often happens. So our conversation is around starting something from the grassroots level, really addressing the real issues.
Very important work.
Thank you. It's hard for me to see. Commissioner Thompson, question.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Dr. Rye.
Good morning.
One quick question. I know that we'll be urgently looking at the transfer credits for the students, but are we also going to be able to gather information regarding the financial impact? You mentioned earlier, we know that there's an increase from community college to 4-year, but will the institutions be able to share information in any way about what students applied for at their first institution versus transferred and received at the second institution? Or will there be a record that indicates, hey, when they were at the first institution, for example, they received X amount of dollars versus at the new institution? Just food for thought.
Thank you. Our first goal is to make sure that courses taken at community colleges are accepted and credits are transferred and applied to the academic program. If students have to receive 2 or 3 courses that they have already taken at community colleges, that adds to the financial burden to our students. So making sure that that happens. Secondly, the tuition stability is a pretty serious issue. And I'll ask Dr. Dowd to address the third part that you raised about data collection.
Sure. Thank you, Secretary Wright. Commissioner Thompson, we have some of that information. We have not done an explicit analysis as you have just described. We can look into that and see what that looks like and see what we can pull together for you. That would be a very interesting analysis to better understand the financial impact of our transfer students. In many ways, and I am talking out loud without my Director of Research and Policy Analysis here, we could possibly do kind of an analysis before the Transfer with Success Act and then an analysis after, and see if hopefully these new rules around accepting credits will have helped students, as Secretary Rye just implied, that students aren't having to take an extra semester of courses when they transfer because their courses will have applied to their program of study. So we can look into it. The short answer is we can look into it. We have some of that information, and I can report back to you.
Well, actually, I'm not looking for an answer now.
Okay.
I think as we move forward, that it be built in to the work that needs to be done. It may be a bit premature at this point to just pull something out, but you're going to have this strategic council just to make sure that it's part of the information that's on the table as the planning begins, as opposed to doing it after the fact. That was my point. Thank you so much, though. It's good information to know that things are moving forward.
Understood and noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Serrano.
Yeah, I guess my concern is more of a story that came out a few months ago. I guess probably December. It's from UMD's computer science department cutting back the number of transfer students from 1,000 to 100 per year. And I guess that kind of triggered a question for me. Was like, what tools do we have, or what resources do we have to basically tell a university that, I mean, if our intentions are we want students to go from community college to a UMD, and this is a pipeline because we believe it's more kind of equitable and low cost for students. How do we make the case when the university just says, we don't want any transfer students, we want only our own students? Because that's basically what they've done. They've gone from 1,000 to 100, and they're basically not taking any more transfer students. So what resources do we have as MHEC to do that, to try to change up that, or to start a conversation to make the case that transfer students are great for a university?
So,
and actually, can I put a slightly more pointed point on these questions, which is, what are the incentives or mandates that we can create that actually make that happen? There's, of course, the making the case, which I think Commissioner Serrano is talking about, but also what are the tools, because we believe this is in the academic and the state interest. So let me, Commissioner Serrano might be too polite to say it, but I'll say it. What are those tools that allow us to really incentivize institutions or push institutions to make this happen? And apologies for stepping on your question, but I thought it's a really important one.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, thank you. It's an important question. The issue there, as I understand, is the capacity issue. They have run out of rooms. They have run out of instructors. The program is nationally recognized. A lot of students are interested in. The freshman population has exponentially increased. So those are the challenges they are facing. And that's a good news for the state too, that one of our own program is sought after by students across the country. We will work with the university to see what can be done to increase the transfer students. UMD has accepted transfer students very happily in their engineering program, in this business program, and also in computer science program. Engineering school, Clark School of Engineering is ranked among top in the country for producing black engineers. And that happens because of the transfer students. Transfer students play a very significant role in that ranking. So I know university understands and appreciates the role of transfer students. We'll continue to work with them. But let me also tell that the state of Maryland has other institutions with very high quality computer science program. Morgan State University, you have UMBC, and several others. So our students have option. They have other computer science programs are also accessible to them, but we'll continue to work with University of Maryland as well. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Dr. Dow? Oh, Dr. Dukes, Commissioner Dukes.
Right. So thank you, and thanks both to Commissioner Serrano and Commissioner Agoop for the question that we're asking, and certainly the spin that you put on it. My question is really about how do we look at some of the really best practices that are occurring around the country with regard to transfer? Practices that Maryland, quite frankly, has been reluctant to adopt. Common course numbering, all of those things. And certainly in my role working in the community college, those were things that we have attempted to put forward for consideration for some time. I also think back to the transition reports, and some of us served on the particularly the higher education transition report. And there are a number of goals that we presented to the governor that really do require institutions to think differently, to be more innovative and transformative and collaborative as we think about Maryland and both a growing economy and a new economy. And much of that resides in the sciences and the STEM field. Whether we're talking about quantum, AI, all of those kinds of things. So I would encourage us as we continue to look at the state plan for higher education to also think about the mechanisms that will need to be in place in order to achieve the goals that have been set in education for the state of Maryland. So I think this is a great conversation to have. It's a good time to have it. And it may be an opportunity to invite in our higher education leaders to engage them in a conversation, a task force, an ad hoc committee to begin to look at these things much more in-depthly and to determine and figure out how we can ensure that higher education, K through 12, and certainly, as they say, 13 through 20 and beyond are available to our students, and that we eliminate as many barriers as that we possibly can and really understand why there have to be some barriers that remain in place.
I think those are excellent points, Commissioner Dukes, and you've put a lot of work into the work of the transition report higher education subcommittee as chair, and I think it's a good reminder to go and look and see what some of those recommendations were. And I really love the idea of an ad hoc committee or a task force on this topic. So Dr. Dow and Dr. Rye, let's be sure we follow up on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, our next agenda item is an overview of the recommendations by the Program Approval Process Legislative Work Group.
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to let Secretary Rye provide some open. Oh, okay, you want me to go into it? Okay. So in front of you, and I apologize for those joining virtually, there is a 4-page summary of the recommendations. This is pulled literally from the work group recommendation report. It just pulls out the specific recommendations. There are 8 sections. I'll go through the sections quickly. Operational missions, a second section regarding recommendations for the state plan of higher education and state workforce development needs. The third section speaks to recommendations regarding letters of intent before an institution submits a proposal. The fourth section is a recommendation regarding establishing a collaborative grant fund. The fifth section, which has, as you can imagine, the most amount of recommendations, is around the program approval objection process. The sixth section is a recommendation specific to distinguishing between unreasonable and unnecessary duplication. Seventh section is criteria for full program review of substantial modification, so a recommendation to consider revisions to that definition. And then the last section is some additional follow-up recommendations and next steps for the group. I won't go through these in detail unless you want me to, but I can assure you that we are looking at these recommendations. I have an implementation plan drafted to figure out when we need to do what. Many of the recommendations create new annual cyclical reports, things that will come before you as commissioners for review and approval. So we are, like I said, working through what that looks like over the next 3 to 4 years, really. The most imminent or kind of pressing need is there's a recommendation in here about collaboration with Department of Labor and Department of Commerce regarding identifying workforce needs. So we have had some initial conversations with those agencies to let them know that this recommendation is now out in the public. Both agencies are super excited about this endeavor. And I look forward to reporting out as we continue to consider how to implement and moving these things forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Rye for some comments or answer questions.
Take questions first.
Okay.
Commissioner Thompson?
Thank you for the analysis and report. Some of this is going to turn into legislation, correct? And so do you envision all of these pieces in legislation, or some you can actually begin acting on now? And for those that you can begin acting on now, what sort of resources will your team or MHEC be required to do to effectively and timely implement some of these changes?
Absolutely, thank you. That is my understanding, is that we will see a bill for some, but not all of these recommendations. Not all of them require statutory changes. Some of them are just things that our agency will do and continue to implement. So some of this is a little bit of wait and see to see what's in the bill, to then figure out, okay, it's not in the bill, then we're going to do regulations. Or it is in the bill, we may need to do amendments or make sure that the language works. And work through legislative session. So we'll see what happens over the next 77 days, I think, 76 days, around potential legislation and what that looks like. So we'll know quickly next steps on issues on that front. The easy lifts are things like an administrative guide. We are already working internally on that and making sure that that will get posted publicly. We had already started a work group on substantial modification, and then we stopped, and then we started again, and then we stopped. So we're ready to pick that back up, and certainly does not require any statutory changes to do that. So there are a handful of things that we will pick up and move quickly. Things that we'll be interested to see if it gets put into statute are things like the letters of intent, the mission review process, changes to that. And again, we're prepared to take it on even if it doesn't change in statute, but if it does change in statute, we'll address it that way. In terms of capacity, I think the biggest lift, I think most of these things we can do with existing resources. The biggest lift will be the coordinated effort with labor and commerce on workforce need. We do not have existing capacity. And when I say capacity, I mean expertise. We really need somebody who can say, okay, great, labor and commerce say we need more widget makers. We need somebody who can translate that into an academic program and work with our colleges and say, wow, college A, B, and C, you're well poised to make widget makers. You already have some curriculum, you already have faculty, you already have lab space. Let's talk about creating an academic program that meets this workforce need. And so we really need somebody to coordinate with those two agencies to make that connection. It's one thing to make a list that says we need more people in these industries and fields. It's another thing to translate that into an academic program. So that's, I think, where if we struggle, it will be struggling in that kind of transactional information sharing.
Yes, Commissioner Agu, and then Commissioner Howe, and then Commissioner Dukes.
Sure, I have a couple specific questions, but on that point, and let me just say this out loud, and I've been lucky to be part of some of those discussions with labor and with Commerce on some of those, and this is also a little bit wrapped up in our state completion goals. So in some ways, a lot of this will proceed together. In my view, the industries are helpful to us as commissioners because when we have, we know there are certain industries where if we 10x the amount of programs that we had, we still would necessarily not hit harm because there's so much demand out there in the economy. Whereas in other discussions we've had to debate, is there enough demand to soak up the graduates that we are going to create? And so to me, I think even beyond how do you make this into a program for us, at least knowing where to focus and where potentially certain debates are more or less intense, I think is really important. A couple of things I wanted to maybe just point out and say out loud, and maybe this is more to my fellow commissioners and folks watching. I'm looking at Section 2. There have been kind of one-off discussions about updating the state plan in this, which I expect either we'll do by ourselves or might be legislation to update by January 1 of 25. This probably is wrapped up with the update of the state completion goal, which of course is going to be, I think, central there. Also, the legislature in here asked, which I don't believe has been part of the process in the past, to have time to comment directly to us on that plan. I'm not sure if they've been part of the process in past. It sounds like it hasn't, or otherwise I don't think they would have made it. We have to kind of think that through. And then one other thing I wanted to name, this comes from actually related to one of the last reports in Section 5, a separate program development process for fully online programs, which I actually think may be a bigger lift than we think. Because of we're thinking about how do we maximize for out-of-state students. There are institutions that are hybrid. They do some online, some in person. So there are complications there that I actually think that we should very much recognize. And I had a question in Section 7 about the 33% threshold or standard. I was not in the room when they made this. In that they believe that this threshold might be too high or too low, or just literally that we should just examine it.
I don't know if the work group had an opinion necessarily on the definition itself. I think the answer is they wanted us to examine it. What it comes down to is there's lots of criticism that this is the wrong way to assess if a program has substantially been modified enough that merits a new review. We want institutions to change their coursework. We want them to stay consistent with industry. That's going to happen naturally. And because we have this 33% rule, that sometimes becomes a burden for the campuses that are wanting to switch courses in and out, particularly for our community colleges when you have a 12 or 15 credit industry. Right. There's just general criticism, and I think we recognize it as staff, that this isn't the right way to say if a program has changed substantially enough that merits a new review on duplication, merits a circulation. So that's kind of the crux of, and again, this has been something we have wanted to examine since the start of the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, and we have not been able to catch our breath to get back to it.
Thank you.
I would just say that just the whole idea of 33% of what?
Exactly.
So it's something that cannot be calculated that way, right? So it's a lot of opportunity to make some changes there.
Commissioner Howe and then Commissioner Dukes.
All right. I just want to say, just for myself, that when I read this legislative report, I was completely shocked by the detail and level of criticism that went into their remarks. I kind of was overwhelmed by the whole thing, I have to say. And for staff, there are a number of these things that we have been discussing with the staff for quite a while. For example, the definition of duplicity of programs and things like that. So I think that there is a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done based on this legislative report. And I will be anxious to see, with all of the budget problems facing the legislature, how much attention is really going to be given to what we need to get from the legislature. That's just a comment.
Commissioner Dukes?
No, my comments actually were articulated by the vice chair, so I'll stand down for now.
Great. Any other questions? Dr. Rye, did you want to make some comments?
Yes. First I want to begin by thanking work group co-chairs, Delegate Smith and Senator King, for their leadership and their unwavering support to this very important work. Under their leadership, as you know, 23 recommendations have been approved. I also want to extend gratitude to everyone that has contributed to this report and recommendations, including the legislative staff, Michelle Lambert and Stacy Goodman. Improving the academic program review process has been a top priority of mine since arriving at MHEC last May, I believe. Yeah. And, until May, I was on the other side of this process. Now I find myself on this side. So I think that from both of those vantage points, I see opportunities for improvement. Certainly, we fully support these recommendations. But we also believe that these recommendations are necessary but not sufficient for what needs to be done. So as an agency, we are committed to bring further equity, transparency, and efficiency into this process. So we will look at continuous improvement. We will implement these recommendations in a very timely manner, and then we'll continue to reform the process, collaborating with all institutions and all the stakeholders, and making sure we have the best possible academic program approval process, so that Marylanders have access to high-quality programs and lift up all Maryland institutions, particularly those that have been historically disadvantaged. So we look forward to these recommendations and next phase of this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rye. I would just add, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, that this was a very collaborative process. Each of the segments of higher institution, four-year colleges, two-year colleges, the MHEC leadership team, and of course the legislature were involved in these detailed 23 recommendations. And our expectation is that our partners, both in the legislature and in the higher education community, both two-year and four-year colleges, will continue to work with MHEC, which is the agency tasked with implementing these recommendations along with the legislature. But that this is very much a collaborative process. I also want to note that, as has been stated earlier, a lot of the recommendations are items that the agency was already working on and was interrupted by COVID, or for some of us new commissioners who have only been here 6 or 7 months, we already were starting to implement or had ideas about doing. So I think that it's very welcome feedback. I think that under Dr. Rye's leadership, this division led by Dr. Dow, the agency is well poised to implement these recommendations. And I think there's an appetite among all of us, commissioners and staff members, that we do want to improve the process, that we are driven by equity, fairness, transparency, consistency, that everybody in higher education in Maryland, starting with the people in this room, on the screen, around this horseshoe table, are interested in improving the process on behalf of Maryland students. Because at the end of the day, the reason that all of us are in this work and in this field is to provide opportunities for the students of this state. So thank you in advance, Dr. Rye and Dr. Dow, for what will be more work, but I think in collaboration with our partners will lead to better outcomes for our students. Commissioner, thank you. Commissioner, is that Tabor Stalen? I really can't see the screen.
I think it's Commissioner Howe.
Judge Howe,
It's
Commissioner
Commi-
Howe.
It's Commissioner Howell. By my comments earlier, it was not meant to be a criticism of this process. I think a tremendous amount of work has been done by our group and their group to come to a substantial number of recommendations. It will improve everything for everybody, and it will just take time to get all these things done. But thank you to all the people who worked so hard to get this report out with its recommendations. And I look forward to future meetings where we discuss implementation. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Howe. Any other questions or comments before we moved on to our report from Dr. Schmertz from the Office of Research and Policy Analysis? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Dr. Dow.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that, and more to come. Thank you.
Dr. Schmertz and Dr. Lin, the floor is yours. We're very interested in learning about the 400-page plus performance accountability report that I spent much of yesterday reading.
Now you can offer suggestions.
Yes, you can hear me. Yes, so as you indicated, Dr. Lin will be presenting, and I am here to help answer questions.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for having me here, and thank you, Chair, and thank you, Secretary Ryan, thank you, Commissioners. And so my name is Yuxin Lin. I'm Associate Director of the Research and Policy Analysis. So here I present you today the 2023 Performance Accountability Report. So as you mentioned, it's a 400-page report, which is really bunky, but most of them are the institution's submission. And so in front of you, you have a 18-page short version of the report. So that is our MHAC institutional assessment report. So I will refer to the report frequently in my presentation because some of my graphs and charts might be small to be able to see. So I will refer that in your report. So if you want to take a closer look, and feel free to do that. Let me see.
We would ask, correct me if I'm wrong, that we save questions for the end?
Yes, please. Yes, we're welcoming any questions, and please save the questions in the end. So before I start my presentation, so I want to give you some background and context about Performance Accountability Report and its framework. So Performance Accountability Report, or PAR, is an important mechanism by which public colleges and universities in Maryland are held accountable. And institutions in this report established and maintain performance standards. And so they can meet the institutional and statewide higher education goals. And in the report, they assessed the key metrics, and they also set the benchmarks toward the respective key metrics, and also they evaluate the progress they made toward they make toward to meeting the benchmarks. And so the current Performance Accountability Report framework is derived from the reform that happened in 2000. And since then, the report requirement is the same for community colleges and for the public 4 years. So can I actually switch to this one? Because it's easier for me to see. And for community colleges, they have the same metrics, but slightly different benchmarks, depend on their different missions and different priorities. And they update it every 5 years about benchmarks and metrics. And so the current benchmarks and metrics was updated lastly in 2021. But in contrast, public four-year colleges and universities have a slightly different metrics. And because they're serving different populations, and they have a slightly different missions. And the current public four-year colleges and universities PAR framework is actually the mainstream effort of to fulfill the two two sides of the agency's requirement. First is MHAC performance accountability requirement, and second is Department of Budget and Management requirement. That is called managing for result. So for the all 13 public four-year colleges and universities, they submit the same format of the metrics to both DBM and to us. And here is the brief summary of the performance accountability cycle. And so every year, spring and summer, MHAC issues guidelines on reporting for the upcoming cycle. And then in the summer and fall, institutions submit narratives reports to MHAC. And now in the fall and winter, so we perform analysis and prepare the statewide report. So that is a report you receive right now. And now in the winter, the commission reviews and approves the report. And after it's approved and report will submit it to the legislature per law. And so, so the report actually have the three important components. So first is the summary of the key indicators and how did the enrollment, retention, and completion outcomes evolve over time. And the second important component is institutional assessment. Are the institutions on track to meet their established benchmarks? And finally, every year, MHAC proposed several prompts for institutions to respond. So this year, we have two questions. How do institutions identify long-term equity gaps? And I will start from the summary of the key indicators. So I want to remind you, so there is a lag between the year of the reporting and the year of the data collecting. So for the next few slides, the most current data available will be academic year 21 to 22. So I will start from the undergraduate full enrollment. So you can find the same chart on the page 5 and figure 1 on the report if this chart is too small to you to see. And so the enrollment decrease that start from the pandemic has been slowed down in the fall 2022. And total undergraduate enrollment decreased from 233,000 to 230,000 from fall 21 to fall 22, which is a 1.4% decrease. But last year, this decrease was 6%. And this decrease was majorly contributed by community colleges, which experienced a 2.7% decrease in last reporting cycle. And in comparison, public 4 years enrollment remains stable in 2022. But there are some bright side about undergraduate enrollment. So this chart you can find similarly on page 5, figure 2. So that is undergraduate enrollment disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So from the top to the bottom, the line represents the white, black, and other race and ethnicity student, Hispanic student, and Asian student. And as you can see, the undergraduate enrollment in Maryland public 4-year and community colleges stay diverse, and over the past 10 years, the proportion of Asian, Hispanic, and other race and ethnicity students keep growing, and the proportion of Black and African American students remains stable. So the next slide show the graduation rate for public 4-year institutions. So you can find the same figure on page 8 and figure 5. So we measure the graduation rate in 150% of normal program length, which is 6 years. And in track of the enrollment, we track students' 6-year graduation rate by cohort, the year when students first enter college. So because our most current available data come from the year 22, so if we backward by 6 years, the most recent cohort whose 6-year outcome is available is 2016 here. And as you can see, the 6-year graduation outcome has been improved compared to 10 years ago. However, the recent 3 cohorts has been experienced a decline or stop. And then minority students experience larger effect. The African American student 6-year graduation reduced by 1.9 percentage points, which is larger than other race ethnicity group. And that infers that racial gaps become wider during the pandemic. Next slide is a graduation and transfer rate for community colleges. So similarly, we track graduation rate and transfer rate by 150% of the normal program time, which is 3 years for community colleges. And similarly, we observe that graduation and transfer rate has been improved a lot compared to 10 years ago or 10 cohorts ago. But recently, in the recent 3 cohorts, the student experienced a stop or decline in their graduation and transfer rate. And African American student, again, was down by 1.9 percentage point, and which is the largest impact. And now I'm going to summarize the institutional assessment. So again, the institutional assessment summarizes the key performance metrics they established and compare that to the benchmarks. And you can find the detailed analysis in page 10 to 12. And I will start from the public four-year institutions. And again, the public four-year institutions have different metrics because they serve different students and have different missions. So there are no 2 institutions share exactly the same metrics, but I will select some of the metrics that reported by most of the institutions and show you the result. So start from the access. So in general, public four-year institution. So in general, public four-year institution meet or on track to meet the goals on access. So as the last slide shows, the undergraduate enrollment for public four-year institutions remains stable and merely decreased by 0.4% in this reporting cycle. 11 institutions report measure on enrollment for minority economically disadvantaged students or enrollment of Pell Grant recipients, and 10 of them meet or on track to meet the goals. And 6 institutions report measure for STEM enrollment, and 4 institutions meet or on track to meet the goals. And next is success indicators. So in general, public four years were able to meet the goals in terms of the success metrics. But however, they still face challenges in equity issue. So 9 out of 11 institutions report measure for second year retention rate. 9 institutions met or were on track to meet the goals, but 2 of them did not meet the goals specifically for minority students. And the 12 institutions report the numbers for 6-year graduation rate. 7 of them meet or on track to meet the goals, but 3 of them did not meet the goals or on track to meet the goals specifically for minority students. So next is innovation indicators. So for innovation, we evaluate the institutional effort on improving innovation this year by measuring their licensure exam pass rate. So 8 institutions report on this measure, and most of them were able to maintain the consistent rate for this reporting cycle. For teaching and nursing, there is only 1 institution experienced a decrease in both nursing and teaching licensure pass rate. So next section is institutional assessment for community colleges, and the detailed analysis can be found on page 12 and 15. So again, all community colleges have the same metrics. Otherwise noted, the measures were reported by all 16 community colleges. So in access indicators, so community colleges still face challenges in enrollment. So as the previous slide shows, their credit enrollment decreased by 2.7% in last reporting cycle. Different from public four-year institutions, community colleges also serve an important role in provide all kinds of non-credit enrollment programs. And last reporting cycle, non-credit enrollment increased in community colleges, but fell behind the benchmarks. 13 of them missed the goals for the non-credit enrollment. So another indicators that can reflect the challenges they faced in enrollment and access is market share. So market share is basically a ratio, the proportion of enrollment contributed by community colleges, public 4 years, and independent institutions. So in this reporting cycle, 11 community colleges report they experienced a decline for the market share of the first-time and full-time student, and 13 community colleges report they have decrease in the market share for recent high school graduates. But there are some bright side on the enrollment. That is, community colleges strengthen their relationship with their local high schools. So in high school student enrollment, they experienced the increase in this year. So that is actually the reflection of the dual enrollment and early middle college student. And 13 of them meet the goals or on track to meet goals for high school enrollment. So next slide is the success indicators. So similarly, community colleges were able to meet or on track to meet the benchmarks for retention, but they faced the challenges to meet the goals for graduation and transfer rate this year. And also they faced the challenges from the perspective of equity. So 13 community colleges meet or on track to meet the benchmarks for retention, but 8 community colleges did not meet the goals or on track to meet the goals for Pell Grant recipients specifically or developmental students. And 9 community colleges did not meet or on track to meet the benchmarks for 4-year graduation and transfer rate, and 13 of them did not meet the goals for developmental students especially. So next is innovation. So for community colleges, we measure their innovation from 2 sides. First is their employment after graduation, and second is the licensure exam pass rate. So in the last reporting cycle, community colleges actually see an improvement in employment after graduation. For example, 15 community colleges experienced an increase in employment rate within 1 year of graduation. And community colleges still serve as an important role in economic mobility. Student income 3 years after graduation is almost 3 times higher than what they can earn before enrollment. However, they face the challenges in maintaining their licensure exam pass rate. So in the reporting cycle, 11 institutions experienced a decline in the pass rate, and 10 of them missed the goals or are not on track to meet the goals for licensure exam pass rate. And the final component of this report and presentation is the responses to MHAC prompts. And you can find the detailed answers and questions on page 15 to page 18. So this year we asked 2 questions, and we asked several small questions under each question. So first is identifying long-term equity gaps. So first question is, what are the largest long-term equity gaps that existed in student access, success, and innovation in your institution? Please note the long-term equity gaps refer to the inequities that existed long before the COVID-19 pandemic and persisted over years. And second is, how are these equity gaps uncovered, discovered, identified at your institution, and how are they shared with your community? And the final question is, what interventions have been implemented to eliminate these gaps? And we have another set of questions. That is how you measure the equity gaps in your institution. So first, the small question is, how has your institution used to disaggregate the data to identify equity gaps in students' educational opportunities and outcomes? And second one is, what stakeholders' engagement, such as students, faculty, staff, etc., is used to collect and review this data? And the final question is, does your institution set goals, benchmarks in regard to the elimination of the equity gaps? If so, what steps does your institution take to ensure accountability in meeting the established goals and benchmarks of the equity? There are a lot of questions and a lot of answers. Due to the time limitation, I won't repeat every single response here. So for the detailed summary of the responses and for the raw version of the answers, please refer to the report 15 to 18. And here I just want to highlight some of the key takeaways. So first, it is commonly mentioned that gaps in student success for racially or socioeconomically underrepresented students is the gaps that they experience the most. And those gaps are usually identified by disaggregated data and the campus climate surveys. And the Office of Institutional Research usually play a central role in collecting and disseminating the data. And these results are often shared within an institution's community, which includes administration, staff, faculty, and students. And finally, most institutions set benchmarks to eliminate equity gaps and implement various interventions to improve the equity. So this concludes my whole presentation. So in summary, the impact of COVID-19 on enrollment has been diminished. And there are still some ripple effect found in retention, graduation, and transfer rate. There are some disproportionately larger effect for minority students on some measures. But looking forward, undergraduate enrollment rebounds in 2023. So from our 2023 opening for enrollment, the data suggests that undergraduate enrollment recovered statewide by 4.1%. Another bright side is tuition and fee still remains stable in fall 23. So for the community colleges, the tuition and fee only grow by 2.5% for the in-state, in-district student and 2% for the in-state student in public four-year institutions. So let me remind you again, this is action item. So the recommendation, I will read it loudly. It is recommended that the Maryland Higher Education Commission approve the 2023 Performance Accountability Report and ask the acting secretary to forward it to the governor and the General Assembly as required by law. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lin, for an extremely informative presentation. This is a topic of great interest to this administration and to this commission in particular. And I commend MHEC for the two prompts that you asked with respect to equity gaps, looking into how you measure them and how you identify them and then measure them. So I'm sure my colleagues have questions. Commissioner Burnham, followed by Commissioner Serrano, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions. First, I'm just struck by the fact that this accountability report seems to apply only to the public institutions. And I wonder if there are any accountability measures in place at all for the independent colleges and universities, since they receive some state funds as well, as I understand it.
Sure. I am happy to answer that question quickly, and then I will defer the background introduction part to my supervisor, Dr. Schmerz. So short answer is no, we do not have that for independent institutions. And so Dr. Schmerz may be able to introduce more about the whole framework.
Sure. This report is guided by law.
Sorry, you faded out. We can't hear you now.
Sorry. How about now?
Yes. Much better.
Okay. In short, this is a report that's driven by statute, and statute requires the public institutions report this. Through this mechanism, they're held accountable. Your broader question of are there other mechanisms by which we hold private institutions or state-aided independent institutions accountable? There are reports that come to mind are the Cultural Diversity Report, which is something that they all participate in. But these kinds of metrics, this report is really solely dedicated by law for the publics only.
All right, thank you. My second question has to do with the finding of a declining market share for community colleges. Given that tuition at the community colleges is much lower, that finding was a little bit surprising. It indicates that something more than cost of attendance or price of tuition is at play there, and I wonder if you have any insights from the reports as to what contributed to that decline.
Yeah, that is really a great question. We're still investigating the reason behind that. That is also really surprised the phenomenal for myself when I read the report, because as you understand the market share, the definition of the market share, it is contributed by public 4 years, community colleges, and independent institutions. So if community college is losing their market share, so on the other side of the table, so public 4 years and independent institutions are gaining their share.
Yeah.
So in that case, so we're still investigating why students lose their interest to community colleges, but they switch to public 4 years and independent institutions. But yeah, so that's a great question. So I myself definitely would like to investigate more on this. But I will defer the other part to Dr. Schmerz and see if she has any insight on that.
I have nothing really more to add other than you are correct. The denominator is all students going to college from a given service area. And so the way in which the market share is measured is for a service area's county. There is always a concern that this may be a data quality issue as well. So I would hate to have a smoking gun of something more than what may be afoot, which is right. Students are making choices because other opportunities are available that they may not have felt were afforded to them before. There may be stronger recruiting efforts happening with our public institutions as well as our state-aided independent institutions. But I agree with Dr. Lin that understanding that mechanism, and we are by no means alone in that. I'm sure the community colleges themselves are wondering what is going on with their depressing of their market share. That's an important variable for them. So great question.
Thank you.
Commissioner Serrano and then Commissioner Dukes.
So my question is more on like a couple of issues. I think one is like the affordability metrics. I guess, I mean, when I think of affordability, I think of like kind of debt at graduation, unmet student need, and then kind of tuition as a part of the family's income. How much of those factors are in here? It sounds like we have a little bit of it, but not. I mean, and is there an opportunity to include that within, like, if we're serious about looking at affordability metrics and we're trying to measure that from institution to institution, how much room is there to include other metrics that we might not be capturing now in the future?
Thank you for the question. To answer your question first is, yeah, we definitely have some metrics regarding the how much tuition you pay and how much financial aid distributed to the student. But as I mentioned, first is public 4-year institutions oftenly don't have the same metrics. So the reason those metrics was not summarized here is not because they didn't report the measures. It's just only few of them report, and it's probably they use different definitions, and it's really hard to summarize them in the single bucket. And another thing is we, as a state, as a research office and as a state agency, I think this affordability is a really important definitions, and we have to discuss about how we better define the affordability. Should we actually only look at the tuition and fees, or we need to look at how we actually define student needs and met needs and the financial aid received by students. So definitely there are some, and but we're happy to actually investigate more and try to summarize them as an indicator that can better reflect affordability. But for now, we majorly focused on Pell Grant students, proportion of Pell Grant recipients, and also we measure something like tuition and fees as a general, very rough indicator for that. So that's a great suggestion, and I would refer the rest of part to my director.
So I think it's important to emphasize. So Commissioner Serrano, you ask a few good questions. One, the institutions will report what they choose as metrics. So I think what Dr. Lin is getting to is if only one or two institutions really takes that on as a metric of what they want to be held accountable to. Again, the public 4 years in particular, the Department of Budget and Management really drives their metrics, and we are a collaborator on that. The responsibility the commission could have in the future to establish other state metrics that we wouldn't hold them institutions accountable for is a different conversation, probably broader, and possibly pulling in our AG to take a look at the accountability law to see if that's a space by which we could declare a statewide set of metrics that we would want to ensure they all follow the same definition. So, because I heard two questions in there. are they currently holding themselves accountable, and could we in the future? And so the answer to the first one is sometimes if the institution chooses to, and then in the future, if we wanted to as a commission, could hold them accountable in that way, I think the opportunity may arise, and we could have conversations in another forum for that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dukes.
Commissioner Dukes?
Yes, thank you. I believe that what we've heard today is not only great information in terms of how institutions are progressing or where there might be some lagging, but again, I would offer that this offers the opportunity for us to think about the state plan for higher education. How do we want to buoy up institutions? How do we understand what their individual and collective needs are? I thought about three things in particular. When we talked about decreases in market share, you know, what are the socioeconomic issues that are have the potential to be impacting that? As we came out of COVID, we think about those families who lost employment, and are they still working to get themselves back economically to a pre-COVID kind of situation? I also thought about, you know, when we think about what I would think is these are numbers that we're listening to. What are the stories behind the numbers? What are the stories behind the statistics? And how do we ensure that as we move forward, that we're understanding those stories? I'm a firm believer of having representatives come in and speak to the commission to tell us what are the struggles that they're having on at their institutions. What are the opportunities for supplemental funding to even come through MHEC, a request that might allow us to do some more research and some more digging into these kinds of issues. But I think that the numbers, the statistics are fine, but I don't believe that they tell the full story, and they certainly don't tell the full story across our myriad of institutions. So thank you for allowing me to make the comment.
Very good point, Commissioner Dukes. Thank you. Commissioner Agu and then Commissioner Serrano.
Thank you again, Dr. Lin. Just a couple questions, some big, some small. First, for the community college data, and I'm just going to your graphs, I see that the date cutoff there is 2019, and I want to make sure I understand this correctly, whereas for the 4 years it's 2021. I was just curious for the difference in the kind of most recent year of data, and tell me if I've misread that.
Are you referring to the enrollment or different?
I'm looking at I'm looking at figures 1 through 4 for the 4 years that seem to go to 2021, and then if I look at figures, sorry, I just want to make sure.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So, are you looking at the report and it says the retention rate on the top?
I'm looking at page 9 of your summary. I'm looking at figures 6 and 7, and just it seems that the most recent year is 19.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And if I've misread this, please just let me know.
Yeah. So let me give you a clear explanation. So figure 6 is actually we disaggregated graduation and transfer rate by 3 categories. So first is graduate but did not transfer, and second is transfer without graduating, and third one is graduate and transferred. So we disaggregate those in 3 categories because we think those 3 indicators are really important. We not only want students to graduate, but we also want them transferred. So it's really important for us to know whether or not not only where students to go, but also whether or not they complete.
Which totally makes sense. I totally agree with that. Makes sense. I was just wondering why the most recent year is 2019.
Oh yeah, so because we need to have the 3-year tracking period. So if
I
you
see.
actually back 3 years backward,
So we don't
that will
have
be
19
like,
or
19
20 to 22.
Yeah, 19 will
Got
be
it,
the
got it.
zero
Okay,
cohort year. And then
Got it. Okay, thank you. No, that's the technical question.
Sorry.
Second question. Going to this market share for community college, and let me say something that maybe is controversial. As defined, I think we have to think hard as a commission on if that is the right metric. When you think about first time, full time, your 16 to 24-year-old. When you think about how I think about community colleges being used for people who are looking to upscale, who might be mid-career professionals, so on and so forth. Particularly using the non-credit side of many institutions, which is, for a lot of institutions that I've seen, is the fastest growing part. I think it's really less a question for you all, but more a question for us. I think we need to think about tracking that, because if we think about where we want community colleges to go, it's for a lot of professionals who are going to go and come out of the labor market at a clip to get new skills as they need them. So I think it's an important question around first-time, full-time. I think as important, or potentially even more important, is for the folks who are actually part-time, who are trying to work and get better so they can get a better job. So that's just more of an editorial comment. A data question I have is, and I want to make sure I didn't miss this, for the community colleges, this is all credit enrollment. The non-credit side is not reflected here. Is that correct?
So actually numbers are rebounded, but they are still behind of the benchmarks. So basically it's saying they set really high benchmarks when the years are good, and then because of the pandemic, the numbers was badly affected, and then they are still trying to recover and try to fix the gaps they gained during the pandemic.
For non-credit enrollment.
For non-credit,
okay,
yes, the number is up, but so still fall behind of the benchmarks.
Cool. Then I have one last question, and this actually might be more for the chair than for our. So I'm thinking about. I just want to make sure I understand this vote that we're being asked to take. This is basically saying to the governor, this is the report as required by law. We say that this information is correct.
Yes, sir.
Yes, we are not commenting on our views on the performance of individual institutions. Just this is the report. It's accurate.
Your characterization is accurate, as I understand it. I'm looking to our lawyers and to Dr. Dow. Yes. Okay. You're right.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you all so much for the presentation.
Thank you so much.
Commissioners, Dr. Rai, and then Commissioner Serrano.
I think let Commissioner Serrano go first.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Serrano?
so my question is a little bit kind of different. It might sound pretty naive, but I this is my third report, I think, since I've been on the commission that's gone through, and I'm just curious of what the appetite is from Annapolis and from the governor's office for this report, because I just feel like, and maybe it's just me, that I'm just thinking like we Dr. Lynn and Dr. Schmertz do a phenomenal job of putting these data together and putting the charts together. But like, what does it lead to? Because I see quite often like Latinos and African Americans tend to be at the lowest, and it just seems to be like, well, that's what happens. And I'm like, that can't be normal. That can't. I mean, it just seems like this report comes out every year, and there's just the outrage that I see every single time that those nines are so low, and the disparity is so high, and it doesn't seem to change anything. So I'm trying to think of what we can do to make this more impactful. Do we do a press statement with this? Do we all gather in front of MHEC and say, this is what we're calling on the state legislature to do? Or, I mean, I guess at that point we become an advocacy organization, but something. I just feel like it's just the numbers themselves are not calling serious action, and I think we're seeing it's just kind of business as usual, and that's what I guess it's more of a comment than it is a question.
Well, Commissioner Serrano, I would never presume to speak for Governor Moore, but I think anyone who's ever met the governor or read about him in the press would know that he's extremely focused on equity and making sure that every Marylander has an opportunity regardless of circumstance. And he's, I think, very aware of historical inequities in this state. And as you know, Commissioner Serrano, this commission, as currently constituted, is extremely action-oriented in a very good way. So I feel like this is the year to take action on this report. We've already been tasked by the legislature through the program approval work group to redo or tweak the state plan by January 1 of 2025. As the Vice Chair indicated, we were already working on that. So I think this is the moment for this commission to shine a light on these issues, and not only to show the data, but to take action and figure out what we recommend as commissioners, as an agency, what we're going to do about it. I think, as Commissioner Dukes said, the state plan is a good place to start. I also had some preliminary thoughts and even one-off conversations with one of my colleagues about having a statewide MHEC-driven student success symposium, perhaps later this fall, where we could look at this data and particularly look at the responses from some of the universities. I think the data is very rich. I think the crucial question is why, what are the drivers, and perhaps most importantly, what we're going to do about it as a state and what we're going to recommend as a commission. And so I would say, absolutely, Commissioner Serrano, I think these are important issues. I would think this administration thinks they're extremely important issues, and that this is our year as a commission, as an agency, to take action and to really do something about it and work with our university partners. I don't know if any of my commissioners or Dr. Rai want to add anything to that.
Okay, thank you, Chair Martz, and thank you, commissioners, for your questions on this report. I think state completion goals, as we revise those goals, I think then associating performance towards those goals is the right way to go. And we'll be working very closely with institutions of higher education in developing those goals and also following up on the progress once those goals are established. I also see that these reports are shared with institutions, and I can tell you that institutions pay pretty serious attention to these reports. If you look at, we have certainly equity gaps, and those gaps are increasing. They're not decreasing, right? You see that too. But you also see that completion rate for each racial group is increasing, right? It's just that different groups are increasing at different rates, right? So that is the issue that we need to pay close attention to. The other is I think Dr. Dukes explained this very well about enrollments at community college. The way the ratio of market share is calculated here, your denominator is all students who are going to college, right? But as Dr. Dukes explained, because of all socioeconomic reasons, in each community, a lot of high school graduates are not going to college. So they are not in the denominator. And pre-COVID, good number of those students might have gone to community colleges. So that is an issue. The other is that it is not a good statistics for us. For everyone who is staying in Maryland, 2 are leaving our state. So we have work to do in that space. And I have given myself a title of Chief Recruitment Officer, right? And I have urged leadership of our institutions, especially leaders at community colleges, to take very active interest in recruiting, direct interest in recruiting, making sure that the students in our communities are available, have access to community colleges, and they know what's available. They are aware of affordability, and let's make sure that our colleges are student ready, right? A lot of these students have families, full-time jobs, and they're not able to access college, and often they don't have information about the colleges. So those are the areas that I think we will work directly with institutions, and I see a lot of innovation and a lot of drive in institutional leaderships to do those things. The last thing I'll say that for this performance report, there's another part that is financial and budget part that I think we didn't see today. What % of budget is spent where? Right? That is, I think, also an important thing. What % of budget goes for instruction or teaching? What % of budget goes to institutional support, student advising, those types of things, because that gives a complete story where the funding is used and is there an opportunity to make some adjustments there. Again, thank you very much for this report. It's not an easy task. I especially like the 5 questions that you asked post-COVID to all institutions to bring consistency. We have different institutions, different goals, different missions. We have to bring some statewide approach, at least some questions that are common to all institutions and some common matrix so that we can help assess progress towards the state goals.
Thank you for the opportunity to review the material. It's very detailed. I think, an observation from your report as well as the previous report on academic programs is that there's so much rich data. The question is, how do we pull it out into consumable, translating information into lessons and areas of priority and then action? And I completely agree. Having been on the receiving end of many of these reports in various roles, it's what is done about it and what's a priority and how's it translated. And I think in this case, one thing I'd like to pull out for another conversation are the metrics around innovation. The innovation material for the publics as well as the community college focus, at least in this material, around licensure completion for certain degrees, which it seems to me that that's a very reasonable metric. But that, when I think about innovation, first of all, it's a thorny term. It's difficult to define. It could be a little amorphous, but that to me doesn't really encompass the broad breadth of opportunity coming from the institutions that might become metrics to translate into a future state plan. So I think that when I see this, it seems kind of thin around that particular area for accountability performance in both the publics and the community colleges. But on the community colleges, if I'm reading the data right, it looks like there were 11 institutions where the licensure declined. And so that, I don't know if you have any explanation of that, but in the context of that overall category, to the Secretary's point, I really think that we need to think about how this whole category translates into the next state plan and then the accountability around it.
Thank you so much for the question, and I believe you raised a really important problem. That is, we not only want to know whether or not they meet or miss the goal, but also we want to know their explanations. So that is something I'm looking into the report. Some institutions do mention that their declining licensure pass rate is because of the pandemic, and some institutions were saying they were investigating this issue and they're trying to cooperate more with those licensure exam holder and to learn more about what is the best practice to prepare for those exams. And some institutions may not really explain what the reason is and how they improve the rate, but this is something we're trying to reform to the next stage, to actually ask all of the institutions to respond and to really held accountable for those numbers. Not only you need to tell us you have the high number or lower number, but also if you miss your goal, you have to tell us why you miss your goal and what kind of interventions you are currently working on and try to improve the numbers. So I really appreciate that question. So that, and another thing about innovation part is, for public 4 years, as I introduced briefly, because their metrics is not only for us, for MHAC, but also for DBM, for the budgeting progress. So many indicators may not be fully picked by us, but actually picked by them, and they have a full negotiation with the DBM. So it's not really easy to pick a common set of the indicators that reflect their effort in innovation. So this is definitely a great point, and why the indicators for innovation, especially for the public 4-year side, seems to be a little bit thin, as you just expressed. And then for the community colleges also, so even though they report all same metrics, but for innovation part, they are allowed to actually adjust those metrics according to their own priorities and mentions. So for example, one institution do not report any licensure pass rate because they do not offer some program like that. And also they only, for example, if they only have 1 or 2 students prepare for the test and then pass the exam due to the time, due to the personal information protection reason, so they choose not to report. And also because they have different kind of the programs, like in compared to the public 4 years, and community colleges actually provides so many different licensure exam programs, not only nursing and teaching, but also many medical and dental and mechanical licensure exam. So basically, they all report different licensure exam pass rates. So it's also a little bit hard to actually summarize everything into a single bucket, but I agree with you. So basically, innovation is something we hope we can working better for the future cycles, and so hopefully we can better capture what they are going to do.
Very good statement.
may I actually say something procedurally that I think we need to recognize? The law states that the institutions work with their governing bodies. We are a recipient of a process that is invisible to us for possibly many years. And if we were to read the law in like a storybook form, it starts with the mission, and then the mission is to drive their strategic plans, and then the state plan is woven in. And so when we update or revise the state plan, the institutions will have an opportunity in which to establish their goals. But a body that is not in this room, that is central to this, are the faculty, the leadership, and the governing bodies of every institution to determine what matters to them. So we can, again, we may have a responsibility or an opportunity as an agency to have discussions about metrics we'd like them to all do in these buckets. We could say we want these kinds of measures in innovation. But we do have to respect that the governing body plays a role before we ever get any of these. And they are officially supposed to approve the report. So the other layer of accountability that's not spoken about is that these institutions have presented to their governing bodies whether or not they have met these metrics. And they have been held accountable at that level. And so we do rely on the infrastructure as it moves up to us. Again, we're not lacking an opportunity to have discussions with them, but I did want to acknowledge that it's not our report. We do not set those metrics, and they are mapping it onto the state plan. So anyway, I just want to make that clear.
This is just a procedural question I'm thinking about. Our marathon meeting, budget meeting back in September, when I think the 10 of the 11 of us were new, and we were trying to figure out kind of up from down. I'll speak for myself. As I think about that meeting coming in September, I'm going to go back to this report. and I think the questions that you asked of what are the gaps, what are you doing, what have you done, frankly, I think those are questions that I would hope would be answered before September comes and we have that next budget meeting. And to be honest, I think that should be a matter of course. We should hope to hear what has happened on improving performance on these metrics and other new ones, ideally before we're talking about expenditures for next year. That is my personal view, and I would hope it would become a matter of course for the commission.
Yes, very good point, Commissioner Agu. Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, thank you again for the report. And Dr. Rai, you mentioned that we don't know the reaction of the institutions. I don't know how we would get it, but it would be very, very good information for us to have in our back pocket moving forward. You know, some of the feedback that the institutions have to this report, some of the reactions, some of the feelings about it, or anything that they may have written in response to receiving the report. I'm not implying that, I have a way in which that can happen, but it would be good to have something for feedback. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it or not, Dr. Rai, any deeper thoughts on that?
Certainly. As I said, this report is shared with the institutions, and the institutions often pay pretty serious attention to this. They think about improving these numbers, and we can certainly ask for that information. And it comes to us in different reports as well, cultural diversity report and other reports. There are a lot of intersection there. So we will have that dialogue with institutions, and we will try to collect that information. And certainly Commissioner Agu's idea that at the budget meetings and all, we can have more conversations around student success. Thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you.
I agree with Dr. Rai. In my dealings with the institutions of higher education, all of them are focused on eliminating equity gaps, and almost all of them have established goals in their strategic plans. I think what this group can help with, getting back to what my colleagues have been saying, is how to make this very rich data actionable. And that's why we come back to Commissioner Duke's idea of the state plan and incorporating this data and these ideas into the state plan, but also this idea of a statewide symposium. In my day job working with institutions of higher education in this state, there are some institutions with respect to graduation and retention who have programs that work. And so we have we have some of the answers within our own state. Where we can learn from each other through the university system, through Morgan State, through St. Mary's, through the private institutions, through the community colleges. There are programs that work with respect to driving up retention and graduation rates. And when I look at your report, Dr. Lin, and your first prompt is, what are your largest long-term equity gaps that exist in student access, success, and innovation? And the summary answer is, gaps in student success, such as retention and graduation, are the most mentioned equity gaps. There are some institutions in this state who are doing this work well. There are also institutions across the country that are doing this well. And one particular institution that stands out is Georgia State University. For those who are in the industry and have read about Georgia State, they have done phenomenal work. And I've actually been in touch with one of the architects of that work in Georgia State to talk with him preliminarily about bringing some of his lessons learned here to Maryland. So, I'm going to ask my fellow commissioners indulgence, and Dr. Rye and his team indulgence, to pursue this idea a little further of having an MHEC-led statewide symposium where our institutions of higher education can learn from each other, but then also can learn from best practices across the country, such as from Georgia State. Commissioner Dukes.
And if I could just add some commentary to that, the one thing I think we all have to remember is that not all institutions are the same, even if they are within the same category. If they're 4-year, if they're 2-year, they're not all the same. The resources are significantly different. I think that as we move through this process, we have to keep things in mind that we are not necessarily equating apples to apples or oranges to oranges. So even as we talk about a student success summit, what can happen at Georgia State may not be the same thing that can happen at community colleges. So how do we make sure too that we're bringing in a variety of voices based upon the types of institutions who've been able to do this work? And then where does MHEC's responsibility lie in terms of funding?
I think that's a very good point.
So I just want to be sure that we're not trying to slice, the apple with the same knife. It is all very different. And as a commission, we need to understand that.
Very good point, and I agree. Thank you for that. Other thoughts, comments? All right, well, as Dr. Lin pointed out, this is an action item. So I'm going to ask my fellow commissioners for a motion to recommend that this commission approve the 2023 Performance Accountability Report and ask Acting Secretary Rye to forward it to the governor and to the General Assembly as required by law. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. Our last item on the agenda, I'm going to ask the commission for a motion to move into closed session. And the purpose of this is to discuss a personnel matter under Section 305B12 of the state government article of the Maryland Annotated Code. Wrong article? Which article? The general provisions of the Maryland Annotated Code. So if I could please ask for a motion to move into closed session.
So moved.
Second? Second. All right, and I actually need to do a roll call vote. So I'll start with Commissioner Agu.
Aye.
Commissioner Warmack.
Aye.
Commissioner Williams. Aye. Commissioner Burnham.
Aye.
Commissioner Howe.
Here.
And do you approve the motion to move into closed session just to discuss a personnel matter pursuant to the Open Meetings Act exception?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Serrano.
Aye.
Commissioner Tabor-Stalen. She may have left us. Commissioner Thompson.
Aye.
Commissioner Robinson.
Aye.
Was that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Dukes.
Aye.
All right, thank you. And Commissioner Motz, aye. We will move into closed session, and then we will return into open session afterwards to adjourn. So we are now moving into closed session. Thanks.
Logistically, we could go into the back room, but actually, if
Okay, we said we would and we will. Get back on the Zoom, on the Google Meet, please. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, boy.
This is too much from a volunteer job.
What a great solution.
Yeah, it was your idea. Good one.
Yeah, you can't. I didn't trust that Google open session thing.
I think that was.
No.
All right. Thank you to my fellow commissioners for jumping back on the.
Can't hear you, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Wow.
As soon as they can hear you.
All right. Can you hear me now, Dr. Burnham? No. Oh,
We
no,
still
my
can't hear
microphone's on. Can you hear me now?
Is it
No,
mute?
there's no sound from,
I think we're muted. I think we're muted,
Chair
Debbie.
Motz,
Oh yeah, I see it. I think
Yeah, she's on mute.
needs to-
apparently.
someone needs to click that
Yeah,
red button. There
right
we go.
from there. It was there.
All right. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, fellow commissioners. All right. And are we back online?
Yes.
Ms. Ng? Okay. So I would ask for a motion to go back into open session.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any nays or abstentions? All right. Thank you, fellow commissioners. We have concluded our personnel matter that was in closed session. We are now back in open session. We are now at the end of our agenda. So the only order of business is to adjourn the meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? All right. The ayes have it. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. See you in a month's time. Thank you for your public service.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
good
Bye.
afternoon.
Thank you too. Thanks.